Welcome back to Top 5.
Stephen Craig Paddock was born on April 9, 1953, in Clinton, Iowa, to Benjamin Paddock and Dolores Hudson. He was the oldest of 4 sons, and his early life was marked by significant upheaval and instability. Shortly after his birth, the family relocated to Tucson, Arizona, seeking a fresh start. However, this move did not shield them from the shadows of Benjamin's criminal past. Benjamin Paddock was a notorious bank robber who was arrested in 1960 when Stephen was just 7 years old. Following his conviction, Benjamin escaped from prison in 1969, which led to his placement on the FBI's most wanted list. To shield her children from the truth, Dolores told them that their father had died in a car accident, a lie that would shape Stephen's understanding of family and trust. Growing up in a household marked by instability, Stephen Paddock was a quiet and withdrawn child. The family moved frequently, which disrupted his education and social development. He attended several different schools, including Richard E. Byrd Middle School, Sun Valley High School, and John H. Francis Polytechnic High School. Despite the challenges he faced, Stephen excelled academically, particularly in mathematics. His classmates often described him as a math genius, and he was known for his diligent work ethic. He graduated from high school in 1971, determined to carve out a better future for himself. Stephen's childhood was not just marked by academic success, it was also characterized by emotional turmoil. The stigma of having a father who was a criminal weighed heavily on him. His mother, Dolores, worked multiple jobs to support the family, instilling in her children a strong sense of self-reliance and determination. Despite their financial struggles, she emphasized the importance of education and hard work, values that Stephen would carry with him throughout his life. After high school, Paddock pursued higher education at California State University, Northridge, where he earned a degree in business administration in 1977. He then embarked on a career path that included stints as a postal worker, an auditor for the Internal Revenue Service, and an internal auditor for a company that merged into Lockheed Martin. His career trajectory reflected his analytical skills and attention to detail, traits that would later play a role in his more controversial endeavors. In the 1980s, Paddock discovered a passion for real estate investing. He began purchasing properties in the Los Angeles area, including 2 apartment buildings in Hawthorne, California, and an apartment complex in Mesquite, Texas. His investments proved to be lucrative, allowing him to amass significant wealth. By the time he sold off his real estate business, he was reportedly worth at least $2 million. However, despite his financial success, Paddock's personal life was fraught with challenges. Paddock was married and divorced twice, with no children. His relationships were often described as tumultuous, and he was known to be a loner with few close friends. Family members characterized him as boring and unemotional, suggesting that he struggled to connect with others on a deeper level. This isolation would become more pronounced in the years leading up to the tragic events of October 1, 2017. Stephen Paddock was a contradiction, a gambler who took no chances. A man with houses everywhere who did not really live in any of them. Someone who liked the high life of casinos but drove a nondescript minivan and dressed casually, even sloppily, in flip-flops and sweatsuits. He did not use Facebook or Twitter, but spent the past 25 years staring at screens of video poker machines. Mr. Paddock, a former postal worker and tax auditor, lived an intensely private, unsocial life that exploded into public view on Sunday, when he killed 58 people at a country music festival and then shot himself. But even with nationwide scrutiny on his life, the mystery of who he was has only seemed to deepen. On Friday, a law enforcement official said Mr. Paddock's girlfriend, Mary Lou Danley, told investigators that he seemed to be deteriorating in recent months both mentally and physically. Perhaps his methodical and systematic mind had turned in a lethal and unpredictable new direction. To the few people who knew him well, it is the only plausible explanation. I wish I could tell you he was a miserable bastard, that I hate him, that if I could have killed him myself I would have, said Eric Paddock, a younger brother. But I can't say that. It's not who he was. We need to find out what happened to him. Something happened to my brother. The Las Vegas police believe Mr. Paddock may have had a secret life. He had been buying guns since 1982. But something seemed to change last October. He went on a shopping spree, adding to his arsenal until late last month. One of his purchases, a shotgun, came from Dixie Gunworks in St. George, Utah. Chris Michel, the owner, said Mr. Paddock visited the store 3 times in January and February, making the 40-minute drive from Mesquite, Nevada. Mr. Michel recalled Mr. Paddock saying that he was stopping at a number of local gun dealers, that he had retired and moved to the area, and that he was trying to get back into his hobbies. When it came to guns, Mr. Michel said, he was not a novice. The son of a bank robber and a secretary, Mr. Paddock grew up lower middle class in Southern California in the 1960s. From an early age, he focused on gaining complete control over his life and not having to rely on anyone. He cycled through a series of jobs he thought would make him rich, Eric Paddock said. He went to work for the IRS because he thought that's where the money was, but it turned out the money wasn't there, the younger Mr. Paddock said. He went to the aerospace industry but the money wasn't there either. He went to real estate and that's where the money was. Stephen Paddock began buying and refurbishing properties in economically depressed areas around Los Angeles, teaching himself how to put in plumbing and install air conditioning. By the late 1980s, we had cash flow, said Eric Paddock, who added that he had given his life savings to his older brother to invest and eventually became a partner in his company, because that's the kind of guy he was. I knew he would succeed. He helped make my mother and I affluent enough to be retired in comfort, he said. With success came a rigidity and uncompromising attitude, along with 2 failed marriages, both short and childless. Stephen Paddock started gambling. Some who met him described him as arrogant, with a strong sense of superiority. People in his life bent to his will, even his mother and brother. He went out of his way for no one. He acted like everybody worked for him and that he was above others, said John Weinreich, 48, a former executive casino host at the Atlantis Casino Resort Spa in Reno, where he saw Mr. Paddock frequently from 2012 to 2014. When Mr. Paddock wanted food while he was gambling, he wanted it immediately and would order with more than one server if the meal did not arrive quickly enough. Mr. Weinreich said he would get irritated and uppity about it. Mr. Paddock was uncompromising but he was also smart. I would liken him to a chess player, very analytical and a numbers guy, Mr. Weinreich said. He seemed to be working at a higher level mentally than most people I run into in gambling. Mr. Paddock cherished his solitude, his brother said. In 2003, he got his pilot's license after training in the Los Angeles area, eventually taking the extra step to get an instrument rating so that he could legally fly in cloudy conditions with limited visibility. He bought cookie-cutter houses in Texas and Nevada towns with small airports so that he could park his planes. He was utterly unremarkable. This guy paid on time every time and did not cause any problems at any time, said Lieutenant Brian Parrish, the spokesman for the police department in Mesquite, Texas, where he rented a hangar for $285 a month from 2007 through 2009. He also stored planes at the small airport in Henderson, Nevada, from 2002 to 2010, an airport spokesman said, though it is not clear he ever lived at the local addresses to which they had been registered. Even in death, Mr. Paddock seemed to stay true to his ways. He remained in control, answerable to no one but himself. He was ensconced in a carpeted hotel suite. He was wearing gloves, as he often did to protect his sensitive skin. He shot himself before the police broke into his room. A piece of paper with numbers written on it lay on a table near his body. If Steve decided it was time for Steve to go, Steve got up and left, Eric Paddock said. He did what he wanted to do when he wanted to do it. Mr. Paddock was the oldest, and least angry, of 4 boys growing up in the 1950s, said another brother, Patrick Benjamin Paddock II, 60, an engineer in Tucson. Stephen Paddock was born in Iowa, the home state of their mother, Irene Hudson. "My brother was the most boring one in the family," Patrick Paddock said. "He was the least violent one in the family, over a 30-year history, so it's like, who?" Their father, Patrick Benjamin Paddock, also known as Benjamin Hoskins Paddock, was mostly absent, living a life of crime even before the boys were born. A 1969 newspaper story described him as a glib, smooth-talking, confidence man, who is egotistic and arrogant. His rap sheet was long and included writing bad checks, stealing cars, and robbing banks. He was on the FBI's most wanted list. The agency described him as an avid bridge player, standing 6'4" and weighing 245 pounds, who has been diagnosed as being psychopathic, with possible suicidal tendencies. Stephen Paddock learned resourcefulness and self-reliance from an early age. In 1960, when he was 7, his father went to prison for a series of bank robberies and the family moved to Southern California. The boy's mother raised them alone on a secretary's salary, the younger Patrick Paddock said. The brothers would fight over who would get the whole milk. Powdered milk, less tasty but cheaper, was the norm. Their mother never explained where their father was. She kept that secret from the family, Patrick Paddock said. Stephen Paddock graduated from John H. Francis Polytechnic Senior High School in the Sun Valley neighborhood of Los Angeles in 1971, according to a Los Angeles Unified School District official. Richard Alarcón, a former Los Angeles city councilman, who lived near the Paddocks, said their neighborhood was working class, with a Japanese community center and tidy ranch houses bought with money from the GI Bill. Mr. Alarcón took a science class with Mr. Paddock and remembered him as smart but with a kind of irreverence. He didn't always stay between the lines. He recalled a competition to build a bridge of balsa wood, without staples or glue. Mr. Paddock cheated, he said, using glue and extra wood. Everybody could see that he had cheated, but he just sort of laughed it off, Mr. Alarcón said. He had that funny quirky smile on his face like he didn't care. He wanted to have the strongest bridge and he didn't care what it took. Mr. Paddock spent his 20s and 30s trying to escape the unpredictability of poverty. He worked nights at an airport while going to the California State University, Northridge, his brother Eric said, and then at jobs with the Internal Revenue Service and as an auditor of defense contracts. But it was real estate that ultimately lifted Mr. Paddock to financial freedom. In 1987, he bought a 30-unit building at 1256 West 29th Street in Los Angeles, near the University of Southern California, according to property records. His brother Eric Paddock said the buildings they bought were not Taj Mahals, but they were nice safe places. Crucially, they were excellent investments. Stephen Paddock more than doubled his money on his California holdings, which included at least 6 multifamily residences, according to property records. He made money in Texas, too. In 2012, he sold a 110-unit building in Mesquite, outside Dallas, for $8.3 million. He was a good landlord. He kept the rents low, responded promptly to his tenants' complaints, learned all their names and made sure they were happy. When one reliable tenant complained about a rent increase, he took half off the difference. He designed the ownership structure so his family would profit and installed his mother in a tidy house just behind the apartment complex in Mesquite, Texas. Mr. Paddock had an apartment in the complex, but he mostly lived elsewhere. He had been married twice, but the apartment looked like a bachelor pad, said Todd Franks, a real estate broker in Dallas. What you would expect from a 25-year-old single guy. To Mr. Franks, Mr. Paddock stood out because it was unusual for the landlord of a property that size to pay such close attention to the day-to-day running of his complex. He was frustrated by people who did stupid things, Mr. Franks said. He was also willing to fight to defend what was his. During the riots in Los Angeles in the 1990s, he went to the roof of an apartment complex he owned in a flak jacket and armed with a gun, waiting for the rioters, Mr. Franks said. Though Mr. Paddock might have adopted an accommodating attitude toward his tenants and dressed casually, Mr. Franks remembered him regularly wearing sandals and a sweatsuit. Mr. Paddock was focused and astute when he made deals. He was a tough negotiator, Mr. Franks said. He wanted his price. His terms. He was a very savvy businessman. By the 2000s, with both of his marriages long over, casinos became Mr. Paddock's habitat. He liked being waited on, seeing shows and eating good food. He likes it when people go, "Oh, Mr. Paddock, can I get you a big bowl of the best shrimp anybody had ever eaten on the planet and a big glass of our best port?" Eric Paddock said. Gambling made him feel important, if not social. You could tell that being in that high-limit gambling environment would lift him up, said Mr. Weinreich, the Atlantis casino host in Reno. He liked everyone doting on him. He sometimes called for company, inviting his brother Eric and his children for a free weekend in a luxury suite. But mostly he stayed alone. A couple of years ago, Mr. Paddock stayed in one Las Vegas hotel gambling for 4 months straight, said a gaming industry analyst here who was briefed on Mr. Paddock's gambling history. The analyst described him as a mid-level high roller, capable of losing $100,000 in one session, which could extend over several days. He said Mr. Paddock may have lost that amount at the Red Rock Casino in Las Vegas within the last few months. Playing a slot machine can be mindless and is usually a guaranteed win for the casino. That is not what Mr. Paddock played. His game, video poker, requires some skill. Players have to know the history of a particular machine. They can do that by reading a pay table, which tells them what each possible winning hand pays out. One of the ways that video poker players get an advantage is to play casino promotions, which essentially pay out bonuses to winners, said Richard Munchkin, author of Gambling Wizards, Conversations with the World's Greatest Gamblers. A gambler like Mr. Paddock will often lock a machine, meaning he or she monopolizes it and makes sure no one else uses it during a gambling session. For one casino promotion, Mr. Paddock showed up 2 hours early, locked 2 machines and played them for 14 hours straight, Mr. Munchkin said, based on information he had compiled from other gamblers who were there at the time. The promotion lasted 12 hours, he said, but he wanted to play for 2 hours before anybody got those machines. He knew they were the best machines based on pay tables. Mr. Paddock knew the house advantage down to 0.1%, he said. As for the mystery of why Mr. Paddock would go on a shooting rampage at the Mandalay Bay Resort and Casino and then kill himself, most in the gambling industry do not believe it had anything to do with money. He was in good standing with MGM Properties, the owner of the Mandalay and the Bellagio, according to a person familiar with his gambling history. He had a $100,000 credit limit, the person said, but never used the full amount. Mr. Paddock spent so much time in casinos that he was mostly a ghost in the neighborhoods where he had homes. Colleen Moss, a neighbor of Mr. Paddock's in Reno, said she had not seen him once in a year and a half, despite walking her dog 3 times a day and going to line dancing events with his girlfriend, Ms. Danley, at the community center. He did travel. On his 60th birthday, April 9, 2013, he flew to the Philippines on Japan Airlines and stayed for 5 days, according to a spokeswoman for the Philippine Bureau of Immigration. The family of Ms. Danley, his girlfriend, lived there, and she was visiting the country at the time. The couple went again for his birthday the following year. When he did appear at his Reno home, he could be curt. Another neighbor, John McKay, recalled a day when he was hanging Christmas lights on a railing in his front yard when Mr. Paddock walked by. Mr. McKay said hello and yelled out, "Merry Christmas." Mr. Paddock kept walking. He said nothing, Mr. McKay said. Not a word. No eye contact. Even more baffling, when Mr. McKay tried to strike up a conversation with Mr. Paddock about Donald Trump during the election campaign, he got no response. Almost everyone has a reaction to Trump, said Mr. McKay's wife, Darlene. Ms. McKay said that she would usually get up early each morning to watch the sunrise and, when Mr. Paddock was at his home, she would see him dressed in his gym clothes walking to the community center for a workout. Ms. McKay recalled something peculiar: he always walked across the street and would never pass in front of our house. Mr. McKay said that he rarely saw a window or a door open at the house. One day he saw Mr. Paddock's garage door open, and noticed a large safe inside. It is not clear what set Mr. Paddock on his path to destruction. As early as 2010, he could no longer fly his planes. His medical certificate expired, according to Federal Aviation Administration records. Mr. Paddock bought his last house in Mesquite, Nevada, a retirement community of 18,000 people about 90 minutes from Las Vegas that attracts golfers and gamblers from around the country. He seems to have paid in cash, according to property records, and, as he did with other houses, spent very little time there. His neighbors added personal touches to their yards: decorative pots, plants of all colors and sizes. Mr. Paddock's house was unadorned. One of the few things neighbors remembered about him was the solid panel fence he erected. The message was clear: Mr. Paddock was a man who did not want to be seen.
As the months progressed leading up to the shooting, the signs of Stephen Paddock's deteriorating mental state became more apparent. His girlfriend, Ms. Danley, noted a shift in his demeanor. He did not talk at length about politics and did not belong to any political organizations. Reports indicated that he increasingly complained of feeling unwell and grew sensitive to chemical smells. In the weeks before the tragedy, Ms. Danley became concerned about Mr. Paddock's behavior. During his last months, Paddock reportedly often smelled of alcohol in the early morning, she stated, and he appeared despondent. It was reported that he had filled prescriptions for the anti-anxiety drug Valium in 2013, 2016, and again in June 2017, just 4 months before the shooting. The chief medical officer of the Las Vegas Recovery Center noted that the effects of the drug can be magnified by alcohol, which could have contributed to his changing behavior. Despite his mental health issues, Mr. Paddock was not under the influence of any psychoactive drugs or alcohol at the time of the shooting, although his urine did contain benzodiazepines. Clark County Sheriff Joe Lombardo mentioned that Paddock had reportedly been losing a significant amount of wealth since September 2015, which likely led to bouts of depression. According to Ms. Danley, she noticed a decline in affection and intimacy from Paddock, who had been romantic at first during their relationship. He attributed it to his declining health. This emotional distance may have further isolated him, pushing him deeper into a world of despair. Mr. Paddock's gun purchases spiked significantly between October 2016 and September 28, 2017. He acquired over 55 firearms, the majority being rifles, according to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives. Prior to this period, he had purchased approximately 29 firearms between 1982 and September 2016, mainly handguns and shotguns. Ms. Danley noticed the increase in firearm-related purchases but believed his interest in guns was merely a hobby. At his suggestion, 2 weeks before the attack, Ms. Danley traveled to her native country, the Philippines. Mr. Paddock bought her a surprise airline ticket and soon after wired her $100,000 to buy a house there. Most of their communication during this time was through email and text messages. Just days before the shooting, he was recorded by a home surveillance system driving alone to an area for target practice located near his home. On the night of October 1, 2017, starting at 10:05 p.m., Paddock fired over 1,000 rifle rounds from his hotel room, room 32 to 135 at the Mandalay Bay Hotel and Casino, onto a large crowd of concertgoers at the Route 91 Harvest Music Festival on the Las Vegas Strip. This horrific act ultimately killed 60 people and wounded approximately 867 others. Paddock had meticulously planned the attack. Just 6 days before the shooting, he checked into the hotel with 10 shooting range bags and a computer. On September 29, he moved into an additional suite, 32 to 134, connected to the first one. Both rooms overlooked the festival grounds, and he stayed in both in the days leading up to the shooting. After Paddock killed himself, police found 23 rifles and 1 handgun inside his rooms, including 14.223 caliber AR-15 type rifles and 8.308 caliber AR-10 type rifles, all of which were very expensive, according to a law enforcement source. His arsenal included a large quantity of ammunition in special, high-capacity magazines, holding up to 100 cartridges each. Some of the rifles were resting on bipods and equipped with high-tech telescopic sights. All 14 AR-15 type rifles were outfitted with bump stocks, which allowed for rapid firing. Audio recordings of the attack indicated that Paddock used these stocks to fire at the crowd in rapid succession. Around the time Paddock began firing at the crowd, he placed a webcam on a service cart outside his room to monitor the hallway. He fired about 35 rounds through his door, wounding approaching hotel security guard Jesus Campos. The unarmed Campos had attempted to enter the 32nd floor first at 9:59 p.m. on an unrelated matter but found the door to the hallway screwed shut by Paddock. At 10:05 p.m., Paddock began firing hundreds of rounds in rapid succession at the crowd below. He initially started off with a few single gunshots before firing in prolonged bursts. He stopped shooting 10 minutes later at 10:15 p.m. It is speculated that at that time, Paddock committed suicide, shooting himself through the mouth. According to the chronology of events established by authorities in the following days, the first 2 police officers reached the 32nd floor of the hotel at 10:17 p.m. A minute later, they were shown the location of Paddock's door. Between 10:26 and 10:30 p.m., an additional 8 LVMPD officers joined them and began clearing other suites along the 32nd floor hallway. At 10:55 p.m., 8 SWAT team members entered the 32nd floor through the second stairwell nearest to Paddock's suite. Once all the other rooms on the floor had been cleared, police breached his door with an explosive charge and entered the room at 11:20 p.m. Paddock was found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot to the head. In addition to the firearms and accessories found in Paddock's hotel room, there was a note that included handwritten calculations about where he needed to aim to maximize his accuracy. The note contained the actual distance to the target, his own elevation, and the bullet trajectory relative to the line of fire. There were also several laptops in the suite, one of which was missing a hard drive. Computer forensics discovered hundreds of images of child pornography on the laptops, leading to further investigations into the Paddock family. Ammonium nitrate, often used in improvised explosive devices, was found in the trunk of his car along with 1,600 rounds of ammunition and 50 pounds of tannerite, a binary explosive used to make explosive targets for gun ranges. However, investigators clarified that while Paddock had nefarious intent with the material, he did not appear to have assembled an explosive device. An additional 19 firearms were found at his home. Over the weekend following the shooting, Paddock's Reno home was broken into via the front door by an unknown perpetrator. Authorities stated nothing was known to have been taken and confirmed that the FBI was revisiting his homes. According to police, Paddock acted alone. His motive remains unknown. There has been some discussion around brain pathology initially thought to be benign as a possible contributor. Paddock's remains were sent to Stanford University for a more extensive analysis of his brain, but pathologists found no abnormalities present. Investigators believe he was obsessed with cleanliness and possibly had bipolar disorder. Although a doctor did offer him antidepressants, he only accepted anxiety medication and was reported to be fearful of medication, often refusing to take it. The doctor also described Paddock as odd and showing little emotion. Psychologists, ex post facto, have noted a distinct similarity between Paddock's demeanor and the psychological construct alexithymia, which might have modulated his decision to conduct the shooting given its association with various mass murderers throughout history. The Islamic State, IS, tried to claim responsibility for the shooting, claiming Paddock was Abu Abdul Bar al-Amriki, and stated that Paddock had converted to Islam 6 months prior to the attack. However, United States law enforcement officials have found no evidence of a connection between Paddock and IS. According to his Catholic girlfriend, Paddock described himself as an atheist and often said, "Your God doesn't love me."